Douglas, a 9-year-old child living in a difficult familial setting, is the main character of the narrative. The family's financial stability is provided by his father and older brother, who are heavily involved in dogfighting and gambling. They mistreat their beloved dogs, deliberately starving them before games in an attempt to increase their aggression. Douglas is extremely disturbed by this, even though he bravely feeds the dogs in spite of the risk. But after his older brother discovers him, he tells their father, who becomes enraged and locks Douglas in the cage with the dogs. When Douglas's father abuses him, his mother is powerless to intervene. She eventually makes her way out, leaving Douglas to bear his trauma alone for about a year. Douglas is still kept in a small space with the dogs, subject to unforgiving situations. In spite of everything, he develops a close relationship with the dogs and even uses books and periodicals to teach them. Unbeknownst to his brother and father, he finds out. When Douglas's brother finds out that one of the dogs has puppies, he hides them. Douglas makes an effort to keep the puppies safe, but chaos sets in, and his father unintentionally shoots him, losing a finger and grazing his spine. At an important point, Douglas carefully puts his severed finger in a plastic bag and uses a book as guidance to educate one of the dogs to locate a police vehicle. As a result, the sins of his father and elder brother come out, leading to their incarceration and mistreatment. 2 weeks after the court's decision, Douglas is taken to an orphanage where he stays confined to a wheelchair due to his spinal injury from the gunshot. Their father meets a horrible end after do the unthinkable. His older brother receives an 8-year prison sentence. Alone with himself during the day, he observes other kids playing outside. But when Douglas makes friends with Soma, a librarian, an orphan who puts on little theatre productions, his life takes a turn for the better. Douglas feels revitalized and filled with hope after watching these shows. Unfortunately, Soma is adopted by another family, so Douglas is left alone once more, and their friendship ends soon after. 8 years later, Douglas watches Selma's success in the theatre industry while running a government-run dog shelter and providing care for stray canines. Inspired by her successes, he makes the decision to see her live. 8 years after their breakup, Douglas eventually reunites with Salma, his first love. Even though Salma is much older, he still has a particular place in his heart for her. Douglas is disappointed to hear that Salma is getting married shortly and has found new love. Douglas eventually learns that putting your hopes in people will usually end in disappointment. He then makes the decision to spend his life with dogs, gaining the name Dogman. When the 8-year-old brother of Douglas is let out of prison, a few of Douglas's well-trained dogs are sent. These obedient creatures do exactly as he says, even tracking and maybe hurting his brother when necessary. Douglas receives a visit from a government representative after some time, informing him of funding reductions. Douglas has just 3 days to be ready to move his dogs, who will be sent to a different shelter, before the government develops the land. Given his great achievement, social services may extend a better job offer to Douglas. Rather than give his dogs up, Douglas decides to move them all to an old, abandoned school building. He is committed to making a fresh start in spite of the challenges. However, because of his condition, it is difficult for him to get employment in the neighborhood. Douglas persuades the management of a club that hosts drag shows one evening to allow him to perform in spite of his constraints. With the essential theatre techniques Selma taught him, he thinks he will amaze his audience. Douglas tells them that with the assistance of those present, he can stand for a few minutes without moving, despite his impairment. Douglas eventually gets his opportunity to perform, helped to stand before he starts singing by 2 amiable drag pals. Douglas's incredible singing voice takes everyone by surprise, as it was trained at the orphanage by Sama. The crowd roars with approval, even the manager, who stumbles after standing for more than 2 minutes. His pals by the platform assist him. A few months later, Douglas, who is now a club performer, bakes a cake with the dogs' assistants, asking them to deliver each ingredient at his order. They appear to comprehend him. Douglas comes to the realization that he can make significant use of his dog communication skills. Douglas uses his devoted dogs to rob the wealthy in an effort to aid the underprivileged. They break into houses without any planning and steal expensive stuff. Douglas gradually targets a greater number of affluent people, including alleged corrupt authorities. His name, Dogman, gains popularity in the neighborhood and receives backing for his altruistic contributions. A young man comes to Dogman's camp one day to ask for assistance against some local criminals. He goes inside to make his need known, even though he runs into a guard dog. He identifies himself as the local shop owner's son who was sent to get assistance against the gang, causing discomfort to the locals, particularly small vendors, to stop the goons from extorting the local small shopkeepers. He turns to Douglas, also referred to as Dogman. Douglas hands the boss a phone as a second dog comes over to threaten him. When the boss answers the phone, the dog suddenly bites his pocket. Douglas advises him to leave immediately and cease causing disturbance, or he will suffer more punishments from the dog. After dealing with the thugs, they turn their focus to the government figure whose jewelry Douglas mentions. However, since the necklace is insured, the insurance company dispatches an investigator or detective to investigate the situation. The detective begins by reviewing CCTV footage from the official's home instead of encountering a human thief. He sees many dogs enter the house, one of which leaves with the necklace. The detective is convinced that the dogs are the ones responsible after remembering a past case involving dogs. Subsequent research finds CCTV footage showing a wheelchair-using guy leading the dogs. Douglas's role in the thefts is made clear by the find. The detective quickly finds the location of Douglas's typical performance. He even extends an invitation to dinner while seeming like a fan. Douglas, however, graciously rejects in order to avoid any misunderstandings. Douglas, determined to finish the detective's stories, approaches the former school building cautiously after work and points his revolver at the security dog stationed at the door. Douglas quickly unlocks the door to let the investigator inside after noticing that his dog is in danger. Once inside, the investigator declares his intention to retrieve his client's necklace as soon as possible. Douglas reveals the location of the necklace, but when the investigator accepts Douglas's invitation to supper, she makes a crucial error. He walks blindly into his trap and is suddenly encircled by two vicious dogs. The thug boss and his group pay Douglas an unannounced visit the following day, threatening to exact revenge for their earlier run-in. As Douglas gets ready for work, the young man who came to him for assistance grudgingly gives away where he is after making violent threats. Gunfire alerts him to the thug's approach. He gives his hounds orders to get ready to fight the intruders right away. Tension increases as the thugs are gradually defeated in several locations. Douglas appears to have roughly foreseen this incident, in which a thug sets off an electric trap in the restroom. Seeing his troops destroyed, the boss becomes scared and hurriedly calls in assistance. With heavy weaponry drawn, the boss fires his gun erratically, leading Douglas to flee to his private chamber, where he is pursued by the boss with a handgun. Eventually, Douglas gives up. Douglas chooses to accept his fate by sitting in his wheelchair and sipping a drink after realizing he cannot escape. Unexpectedly, Douglas gives the order for his 3 dogs to attack when the boss's gun runs out of ammunition. Douglas decides to relocate after realizing that the current site is unsafe and loads his dogs into a box truck. Their trip comes to an end when authorities carry out a prearranged raid and find Douglas dressed as a dog with multiple dogs inside. Douglas orders the dogs to leave the police car after getting inside so the officers can interview him further. Douglas and Dr. Evelyn, the psychologist tasked with assessing his mental health, have a lengthy discussion concerning Douglas's life events. Douglas describes his hardships, which include pain, aggression, treachery, and disillusionment. He thinks he has a greater bond with dogs and has lost faith in people. In addition, Douglas can talk with dogs, strengthening their relationship even though he knows he will be held accountable for the thug's murders. Douglas accepts this. Despite knowing that death is inevitable, he doesn't want to give up even though he knows he can't avoid it permanently. When Dr. Evelyn leaves, Douglas comes up with an idea. Under his leadership, his devoted dogs band together with other dogs he hired from the city. They storm the police station together, taking out the guards and securing Douglas. Let go. The narrative comes to an end at this point. Thanks for watching my videos.